Alrighty, so I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land of which I'm currently on, the Yuggera and Turrbal people, as well as the traditional owners of the land of which you're all joining us from tonight. I pay my respects to elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm so pleased to be here with you for this special discussion of Matt Nable's new book, Still, and we're in conversation with Cass Moriarty tonight. Before I hand over to our speakers, I'll just run through some housekeeping for our audience. So you will be muted for this session, but if you have any questions, please just type them into the chat box. I'm about to send a link where you can purchase your copy of Still, and this will also show you how to use the chat function, which will be very important for our short Q&A session we'll have at the end at around 7:15, 7:20. So please type your questions throughout and I will pass them on to Matt. And lastly, just make sure that you are on speaker view so that you'll be able to see Matt and Cass in full screen. So that's enough from me. I would like to hand you over now to Cass Moriarty, who will be taking things from here. Both of Cass Moriarty's novels are available at Avid, including Parting Words and The Promised Seed, which was listed for awards including the 2017 Dublin International Literary Award and the Queensland Literary Awards. Her short fiction and creative non-fiction have been published in the Saturday Paper. She is a writing mentor, book critic, and reviewer, and one of her favourite activities is to host conversations with other authors so that she can learn all their writing secrets. Over to you, Cass.
Thank you so much, Yana. Thanks.
Yana.
I just think it's fantastic tonight that, well, it's not fantastic that we're not all together at Avid, because obviously that would have been ideal, but the fact that we can have Matt in Sydney, Yana, you're in Brisbane, and I'm up in Townsville at the moment. So we've really got practically the whole country covered, which I think is some kind of achievement. I just wanted to acknowledge that because I'm in Townsville, I'm on the country of the Bindal people and I'm sure I'm going to mangle the pronunciation, but I think it's Woolgoora Kaba people. Apologies if that's wrong, but as you said, Aboriginal land, wherever we are and wherever we're zooming from tonight. Also wanted to start by saying thank you to everybody for joining us via Zoom. Sorry we're not in person again, but Matt unfortunately is in lockdown in Sydney and just couldn't make it up here. But thank you everybody for all your support, for authors, booksellers and publishers. Every book that you buy or borrow, every recommendation that you make, every review that you write, every launch that you attend, whether that's in person or at home in your pajamas, like hopefully you are tonight, it really makes a difference. So thanks for sharing the book love. So tonight we have another real underachiever here at Avid Reader. Matt Nable is a novelist, a screenwriter and an actor. He wrote and starred in The Final Winter, an independent Australian film that has since been released internationally. His acting roles include appearing in box office and television hits such as The Dry, Underbelly, Jasper Jones, Bikey Wars and Barracuda, and he's worked with actors such as Robert De Niro, Guy Pearce and Vin Diesel. Two of Matt's screenplays are currently in development. In his spare time, he writes books and Still is his fourth novel. Welcome, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Cass. Lovely to be here.
I don't know what the rest of us are doing with our time. Well, you seem like a very busy man.
That sounds much more impressive than it really is, to be honest. Writing. I've been writing for a long time. So I got involved with that well before I was an actor. So they're all just extensions of each other, which is just being creative, I think. So I look at that. Look, the way you phrased it then sounds like I've done quite a bit, but then I still find time.
Okay, and humble. He's humble as well, everybody. So look, I wanted to talk about Still for those watching who haven't read it yet. I worked on this summary line. I reckon it's a gritty, tense, atmospheric, rural Australian crime noir thriller. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I don't know how to describe it, so that you've done a great job, Cass.
I think that's it. It's set in Darwin in 1963. The environment is harsh, the weather is absolutely unbearable, and the characters are tough. Still has been compared to both The Dry by Jane Harper and Scrublands by Chris Hammer. And if you enjoyed either of those books, then I would definitely suggest you buy a copy of Still. Featuring a cop who uncovers a series of mysterious deaths and a possible conspiracy, and a housewife who has lost the sense of herself and wants to escape. The book is full of flawed characters and questions of moral ambiguity. So, Matt, this story does have a really large cast of characters and a complicated plot, like, you know, most good crime stories, but it's really firmly anchored in time and place. And I wanted to start by asking you to describe the setting for us, particularly the weather. Like, I finished the book kind of dripping in sweat. But let's start with the weather, the people, the atmosphere, the sort of tone of the place.
Yeah, look, I spent some time in Darwin when I think I was 18 years of age. I travelled around Australia and stopped there and lived there to top up some money. And so Darwin, the Northern Territory, in fact, is really unlike any other place as far as weather is concerned. It's just so humid. And I was there coming out of the wet season into the dry season, and it was the heat was, it just sort of sat over you, like it felt heavy. You could actually feel it on your shoulders. So, and the people there, I was there in 1990, so it was, you know, coming from Sydney, it was like 5 gears slower. So everything was moved slower. The people there it's almost a frontierish type of feeling there still. And so, you know, the atmosphere, it is an atmospheric novel, and a lot of it is, you know, I think that the weather, because the weather and the fauna there and just its proximity to the bush gives it something really, really unique. And I, like I said, had lived there, and I was always captivated by that atmospheric edge that Darwin had that was so unique and discernible from anything that I'd experienced. So that was one of the impetuses to actually write something there. So the place itself is as big a character as any of the, you know, the human beings that that exist in there, and that was important because, like I said, I wanted to write something that people could taste, they could feel, that they could. There's a level of discomfort that comes along with being in that type of humidity. And I think that was a really good sort of mechanism to intertwine with something that was leading towards something that was sinister and trying to ratchet up some tension. So it was perfect. It was a perfect sort of environment to set this story in particular. So I
completely agree. It's very, very evocative. I was in Darwin in the 90s for just for 1 year as well. And I know exactly what you mean. It's hot and dry, or it's hot and wet, but it's always hot, and you just can't escape it.
No, you can't. That's the thing. And you learn to love it. You learn to really enjoy it once you come up.
I didn't.
I did in the end. You acclimate to it, and I quite enjoyed it. But there are some days that are just overwhelming, and I think there's a lot of drinking of alcohol in this book, and but that's the way it is now, and it was back then. I think Thomas Keneally, who launched the book, said at the launch, he said, after page 200, I had a hangover. You know what I mean? So it's a very, very unique place. Australia's unique, but it's unique within Australia, even, for sure.
And you spoke then a little bit about the people. So the people, or the book is peopled with characters. I guess we're talking 50 years ago, but even today, I think you've got the croc hunters and the fishermen and the cowboys. And did you find that even when you were living there, there's still those kind of stereotypical characters around?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I lived down the road from a bar there called it was called The Cage, and I didn't go in. Like, I was a beefy 19-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid who was playing, was about to go and play NRL football, and so I was capable, but there was an edge to Darwin then that maybe not want to go there. And there were the tough men, fishermen, and like I said, that was a trade, croc hunters, buffalo hunters, and then there was cowboys had come in, agricultural shows had come in, and so you had the tent boxes there. You had the they were, the farmers, the guys that had come from North Queensland to, they'd come up from North Queensland or come across, and they'd all gather together, and so that was a really intriguing world. I mean, you around a different type of a man, I think.
Why do you think Darwin and the territory in general attracts, those certain types of people? Who are they, or what are they escaping from, or what are they escaping to?
I think if you're born there, you become that type of a person because of the harshness of the place. Like I said, the weather, and people living in fear in Darwin with weather. What cyclone? I mean, when I was there in 1990, it had only been 16 years since Tracy. So there was always fear hanging over and what was coming through the Timor Sea and coming and ripping across. There was discernible fear. So you had that, and you've got so many things there can kill you. There are crocs in the water. There's box jellyfish. There's sharks, and then on the ground you've got taipan. It's a really, really rugged area. And so if you're brought up there, that's what you become. You become part of that land, and you become part of the environment. And if you go there like I did, then it's jarring. It's really, really jarring. So I'm not sure too many people, like you said, Cass, come to Darwin and settle there. I'm not sure how often that happens. But the people who have grown up there, I'm not sure that they'd want to leave. It's a very specific place.
And if someone like you is too frightened to go into a bar called The Cage, then I think that just says everything we need to know.
That was the truth. I never went there. Like it was literally 100 meters down the road, and I was like, I'm not going in there. Because
avoid that.
There were bikies in there. There were the Indigenous boys were in there. There was, and it had a reputation. Like they was rage in the cage. It was just it was wild. So yeah, that was 1990. So
probably hasn't changed. Probably
not too much. No.
Well, let's talk about the characters, the particular characters in your book. Introduce us to the two main characters. So we've got Senior Constable Ned Potter, and we've got Charlotte Clark.
Yeah.
Who are they at the beginning of the story, and what do they each want from life?
Well, look, Ned Potter is a young police officer, and back in the territory, it's the Northern Territory Police, so that extends from Darwin all through the territory, so they can be placed anywhere. He ends up in Darwin where he's lived, and he's eager. He's got an older mentor, a guy called Damien Clooney, who he learned off, and so there's some real ambition there. He's also quite objective with. You remember back then in Darwin in 1963, there were a lot of things going on over there that would be very, very hard to stomach these days. And so there was a level of prejudice and racism there that didn't sit beneath anything. It was just very existent. And this guy, Ned, he's got a little bit more objectivity about life in general. So he's, he can see that, he's aware of it, and he's got a good moral compass. So although he's ambitious and he's driven by this moral compass, there are elements within the police force and higher up that don't see things as he sees them. And so he's in this investigation. When this investigation started, it's evident that he's going to be thwarted, or it's going to be made very, very difficult for him to follow through on things, which is really frustrating because innately, as we learned from Ned, he's a guy who likes to finish what he's doing. So then there's Charlotte, who's a housewife, married to a man she's been with for quite a long time, and he's a product of a pretty rugged sort of adolescence. He was a rodeo rider, and he's inclined to be in line with, the way, 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 the way most of what Darwin was thinking and doing. And she's just really, really.
She's quite young though, isn't she?
Yeah, she's in her early 20s, and she can't fall pregnant, or they've had a couple of miscarriages, and she's just wondering, without any sort of real conviction of living the life she's in, but wonders about what her life might be like outside, not only Darwin, but maybe in Australia, but somewhere else. She's just really, really entertaining, no more than just suppositions or reverie, but she's wondering what life might be like. And so we've got two characters, for whatever reason, are quite still in their lives, and that's where it's a metaphor.
That's where the title, yeah, and two very different characters too, but they do come together in the novel in sort of unexpected ways.
They do, yeah. I mean, they're aware of each other, and Darwin's a pretty small place back there, a suburb apart, so they're aware of each other's existence, and through the mechanism we use in the novel, they end up helping each other. One to uncover what has exactly happened, and then juxtaposed with giving Charlotte an opportunity to sort of move on.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about some of the themes that you speak about in the novel, or that you explore in the novel. But it is a crime story at its heart, although there is a lot more going on than that. I wanted to give you the opportunity to give us a little bit of an outline of the crime aspect, but without any spoilers. So maybe just, what happens at the beginning, or just whatever you're comfortable sort of giving away.
Ned comes across the body of a young Indigenous man. And he believes, given the circumstances he's found him and the condition of the body, that there was foul play. That's quickly swept away under the carpet and left for another policeman to deal with. Not long after that, there's a discovery of two more bodies, one of an Englishman, another one of a South Sea Islander man. And again, he thinks at this point, because he came across the bodies, that he'd be able to investigate. And again, he's not thwarted from investigating, but he's fed these two men who he is almost sure didn't do it, two Indigenous men that they stitch up. And so beneath all this is the crime that they're trying to conceal. And the police chief and the mayor are manoeuvring this investigation one way, because underneath something, they have a lot of skin in the game with what's going on, and if that gets revealed, then all of their asses in a sling in a big way. So that's
a very good summary. I think that gives people a really good idea of what's going on without actually telling us what's going on. Yeah. Great. As I said, it's not just a crime story. There's some really big themes that you explore. There were four that really stood out to me that I wanted to ask you about. The first one you've mentioned a little bit already was race relations and racism. What do you think the book says about that, or what was it that you were trying to explore about race relations when you were writing?
Look, I wanted to write something, in the 60s. It was a time where things were different. It gave me an avenue to explore and really research a time that was, we're living in very tumultuous times. This was a very, very tumultuous time in a few different ways. So, when I was researching the 60s, early 60s, that year, 1963, there's a lot of things that happened in 1963 in America that sort of married up with a juxtaposition of what was going on in Australia. 1963, Martin Luther King gave that speech in Washington, and there was the Mississippi riots in Birmingham, in Alabama, in Birmingham, and Kennedy was shot. So there was this real civil unrest, and there was this activism that was moving towards, the riots that happened in Birmingham, Alabama, were about, a government edict to, get rid of desegregation. That was going on, and it was causing all sorts of unrest. And back here in Australia, we were still we still were involved in the Australian white policy, which was, basically, well, not basically, it was that policy mandate was to breed out the Indigenous man, and the Indigenous, like, get rid of it. That was stealing babies of the stolen generation, putting them into white families, and that's what they were trying to do. So we hadn't evolved at all. We weren't in a situation where people were saying, let's move towards desegregation and let's stand up and we were nowhere near that. We were nowhere near that at all. I mean, it's quite shameful where we were. And Darwin, more than any other place, was at the forefront of that because there was such a big Indigenous population in the territory and across over to North Queensland. And these Aboriginals were in, the more I researched, and they were in missions. They were taken. They didn't live like you and I lived. They were placed into missions, and kids were arbitrarily taken from their parents and just allocated where they needed to go, where the government thought that they needed to go. So I couldn't write about the 60s, and originally it was just to write something in the past, but I couldn't write about that time of Australian history and not cover what was going on.
Yeah, exactly. I think it would have been, there would have been a huge hole if you didn't cover that. And I think that you've covered it really sensitively. And also, in a very raw and honest way, like you haven't whitewashed any of it.
No, because you can't.
Put it like it is. Yeah.
And it's, you particularly in today's environment, you're subject to, people trying to cancel you and, for all sorts of things. So I'm very, very careful not to ever take the voice of an Indigenous man in this, or his perspective. They're just characters within the novel. And so you have to approach that in a very sensitive manner. But there's no good talking about or setting a story in Australia or Darwin at that time and not covering it. That's the history of what we are. I mean, you can't.
Well, it's not in the history books, so maybe it needs to be in the novels.
Well, people, I'm not doing this. I didn't write it for people to become aware of it, or to shine a light on it. It's just the way it was. So I had to write about it, and because, and I feel great shame as a nation that we were at that place. I think we've made some really, really positive steps forward, but I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be. But that to write about that in a sensitive manner meant that I had to research it properly and make sure that I got it right.
The second theme that sort of jumped out at me was ambition, particularly amongst the local council and the local police. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, look, back then, if you were either side of the line politically, the Labor Party back then traditionally skewed their, I'm not saying propaganda, but their, that ideology towards Catholics. That's what they were doing. And so a lot of the Catholic congregation in any part of Australia voted Labor. And so when you have something like that occurring where, if you look at the Republican Party in America, then they skew it very, very, definitively to Christianity, because that. So when you have that, then it gives you a platform to, to elicit power and to funnel your ambition through a source that you're going to get a positive return on. So that's what that was happening politically at that point in Australia, and to a lesser degree it still happens today. And so anytime someone's given a platform of power, then to get to that point, there's got to be enormous ambition to have driven someone there. And then once someone arrives at that point of power, then it's very, very rarely does that ambition subside or ease. It becomes more manifest in what they do. And so, power corrupts. So ambition, the ambition in this story is, Ned's got ambition, Charlotte's got ambition, but they're in much less of a situation or a position to really realize their ambition. Whereas politically speaking, there's a platform there that, or an avenue that people can realise that ambition. So, I mean, if you look at where we're at today with what's going on with, you know, this pandemic, then I can have ambition for things outside that I can exact on, but if I have ambition to, you know, make a difference here with this pandemic, I don't have any avenue to do that. It's done. The politicians, they do. You know, they get to make their ambition gets to make a difference for all of us, whether it's right or wrong. But you know, that's the difference between the singular ambition of someone and then someone who's in a political spectrum and a sphere, how that differs.
Yeah, I guess that leads into the third theme that stood out for me, which was the duality of loyalty versus betrayal. I felt like that was a constant throughout the book with a lot of the characters.
Yeah, look, I think being loyal is a little bit more difficult than people might think, because when loyalty comes at a cost, then there's going to be some real, you know, some real thought about, you know, before that loyalty is either played out on or decided against. So being blindly loyal, you know, it's not often that people are in a situation, or if people get in a situation where their loyalty is going to come at a cost, then they have a big think about it. You know, the offshoot of that is if you don't, you know, exact that loyalty, then it's immediately seen as a betrayal. So it's a really, really fine line, and it's funny. And you know, it's not a good situation to be in for any human being where they're in a situation or placed in a situation where they've got to be loyal to something, knowing that if they're loyal to that person, there's a betrayal. And if I'm not loyal, then there's the betrayal on that side. So
to someone else, yeah.
Very, very rare that loyalty
Tricky.
doesn't come with some betrayal on the other side of it. It's just the way it works.
So I think hearing you speak, I think the listeners will agree that there's a lot of complexity in this novel. There's a lot of layers to what's going on. The final theme I wanted to ask you about was misogyny and societal expectations, not only of women, but also of men at the time.
Yeah, look, it was very different, you know, like it was remarkably misogynistic. And look, those men of that era, they would never have known what that word meant. There's no way, you know, they were a product of generations before them and generations before them. And we hadn't got to a point in 1963 where any of that was being addressed. It just wasn't. So if you were a white, very well researched in this, because my mother was a lady during that era, you know, and she was married in the late 60s. So, you know, and I remember having conversations with my grandfather and my grandmother, and that's, you know, that was, and not to say that people weren't doing it, those constructs weren't made, I don't think, by people or embedded in our, you know, in our culture to hurt anyone. I think it was just a generational sort of move towards this is what the man did and this is what the woman did. I mean, we've moved so far from that in a short period of time, and probably still got, in some places anyway, some work to do. But yeah, back then it was a very, very different place. And again, I had to be honest about how that was in those relationships, particularly with Charlotte and her husband. That's, you know, that's the way it was. So it's, you know, it's prickly territory to traverse across if you don't handle it the right way or handle it, you know, again, honestly. But within this, you know, within those relationships themselves, the man and wife who are living back in that era, there's still within that construct, there can still be great love. There can still be great hope for each other. There can still be great times that people share. If that wasn't the case, then everyone from that era would have been divorced or remarkably unhappy later in life. But the truth of the matter is that people swallowed culturally what they were served up, because that's the way it was. And there were trailblazers later that went, no, this is not that. I don't feel that, so I'm going to make a, and they're wonderful. That's wonderful. But from majority of people, it's, you've got to, you know, if you're going to write about it, yes, you can read about it and go, oh my God, look at how horrible that was. In the same breath, people lived a very, very fulfilling life that way. They didn't know any better, so they still had kids, wonderful times. Husband and wives had wonderful times, and would have said they lived a very fulfilling life. So, you know, although it was misogynistic in that era, it wasn't about that. It was just telling it. You know, Ned and his wife, although they've got some troubles, live a pretty good existence. They're in love. They love each other. And they're in their designated sort of areas.
They're in their roles.
Not be complete, but they're content. Yeah.
Matt, the descriptions of landscape in the book are really poetic and beautiful. But the descriptions of the characters, I have to say, my God, I've never met a bunch of more physically challenged ex-rugby players and ex-boxers with so many broken noses.
Yeah.
How much of your own personal experience informed your idea of the characters?
Look, those types of men, lots, because I grew up very physical, you know, as a young boy, an adolescent, and a young man. So, you know, I was around very physical men, and my father was a very physical man. My brothers are very physical. So I, you know, played football and I boxed, and, you know, at really high levels. So, you know, I've had more broken noses than I'd like to. Like, I had so many broken noses. When they rebuilt my nose, they took half my ear out to rebuild it. I need a new knee. I'm 49. I'm battered. So, you know, I know those guys because I'm still around those guys. You know, they're still lots of my friends. So, yeah, I had a real insight into hard men. You know,
and I think that, you know, the visceral violence of the crimes in this book is really raw and confronting, and sharply conveyed as well. Do you think that your experience, you know, being around those people and also playing sort of brutish characters in some of the films that you've played in, do you think that that's honed your skills in writing those characters?
I don't know. I think, you know, I've always just been an observer. And so, look, I would say those types of characters are easier for me to perhaps make suppositions of outside their physical appearance, because generally speaking, there's a few things that happen with guys like that are quite uniform, and that can be quite bombastic, or they can be, you know, a little bit disingenuous with, you know, how tough they are, or and there's a bit of a competitive edge between men like that, who's the silverback amongst the group. So I've observed all that and seen all that. As far as acting is concerned, what happens with that type of thing is people need to know where to cast you. So, you know, they need to know. So I look the way I look. You know, it's not particularly pretty, and so I get cast in some roles that are either quite authoritative or they're some real shitbags. Now, that's not always good fun, but it certainly allows me to stretch my legs as an actor, because I'm not one of those guys. I'm certainly a physical man, but I'm not. Well, I'm not a policeman. I'm not a murderer. I'm not a rapist. And I've played all that type of stuff. So, you know, because of my physical background and how I appear aesthetically, but also the things that I carry just innately, when you go into an audition or someone's interested in you in a role, then because I've done all those things, then people read that. You don't need to say anything. You don't need to say, "Oh, I'm tough," or "I'm this or that." People will get an idea. So I think.
And do you think that your acting experience and your career so far, do you think that that has had an effect on your writing as you've gone along? And what sort of screenwriting tips, you know, have you learnt along the way that you now apply to your writing?
Look, yeah, definitely there's role. I think one feeds into the other. So, you know, it's, say, for example, now I'm coming off a job that I was, I directed and wrote. So I was involved with that for a long time, and the role that I played was really challenging. And I'm gone straight onto another job without a break. So that type of transition, because it's been so quick and it's tiring, leads me to want to stop it for a little while and then go and write. But there will be something that I've carried through from both of those roles, the roles that I've just done playing. When I start writing again, there'll be some sort of carryover. That whatever scabs that I've, picked up on these jobs, then it might inform what I write next, or there might be an edge to it that subconsciously sort of flows out. But it's like I'll very rarely will I do will I be acting and then writing at the same time. It's usually one and then not the other. So it doesn't seem to work. But I think
so you keep them separate.
That's how it's worked best. There've been times where I've spent a lot of time overseas on jobs, and I've written then because the weekends come and I'm not bound by my family, basically my kids and stuff. So I'd write then. Generally speaking, try to separate them, but yeah, they do inform each other. There's definitely a synergy between being an actor and a writer, and it can certainly help on both platforms.
And Still is obviously a very filmic book, given your background. Which character would you play?
Well,
if you had a choice.
Well, it'll get made into a TV series at some point, so that will happen.
That's good.
Look, I don't know, because there's only a couple of roles that I could play because I'm too old. You know what I mean? So none of the lead characters. So it was in discussions with guys that we're going to put it together with, and I would probably end up playing the mayor if I
interesting. Yeah,
so there'd be a bit of makeup involved, but that's probably somewhere I could sit and I'm confident that I could do a pretty good job. But we're talking about actors for the other roles at the moment. It's interesting to see, with the Australian talent that we have, who might fit a role, and we'll see.
It's a fun game to play.
It is a fun game to play. Certainly, it's a fun game when you know that it's you've got the ability with the people that you're involved in to actually go to those people and say, hey, look at this.
Would you be interested?
Yeah. So hopefully it's it happens in the next couple of years.
Excellent. I wanted to talk or ask you about dialogue, because the dialogue in the book feels really authentic. How do you think for people who are listening who are writers, what have you done to really develop your ear for good dialogue?
It's a good question. Look, I've written screenplays and TV material and stuff like that. So that's 90% of it is dialogue. There's big print that you set a scene up with, but a lot of it's dialogue. So I don't know. I got told once by someone, that that you can either write dialogue or you can't. I'm not sure if that's completely true, but I think the more you do it, the better you tend to get at it. But I also think that it's a character. If you've got a really good baseline with a character, then you generally, or some sort of, where it doesn't come just from observation, but there's something innate in you, then I think you can write that quite well dialogue-wise. And then it's just a trial and error to see what works and what doesn't work. I mean, for an example, the film I just did that we filmed that I wrote, I wasn't precious with the dialogue. My dialogue in the film was pretty close to what I'd written, but we had Sam Worthington play the lead, and Sam said, mate, if something feels wrong out of your mouth, then just say what you want to say. Just tell the story, but the words are yours to sort of move around. So as opposed to a novel where once it's down, it's down. There's no changing it around because you're reading and it's in your head. So
do you think it's important when you're writing a novel to read dialogue out loud to get a feel for how it sounds?
I don't do it out loud, but I certainly mouth it, so I can hear it. And there's intonations and things that I'm thinking in my head when I'm writing different characters. And so I can certainly hear the voice in my head as I'm writing. And when I reread things, if things don't ring true or something's a bit clunky, then I'll go back and change. And then sometimes I'll add dialogue. So I'll write big sweeping parts of a novel for maybe 1,000 words or 2,000 words without any dialogue in it, and then come back and start it out then. So
and that really tends to bring it alive.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and it also gives me a bit of a chance to think about things before I get into it. So, yeah, but it changes all the time. Like I said, if I've got some sort of anchor or connection to the character within myself, then it seems to be easier to write that dialogue for that character.
So, most or all of the characters in Still are flawed, or they're sort of morally shades of grey rather than black or white. Most of the men are pretty awful, and even the good ones have some terrible attributes. Yeah. And the women too are often sort of downtrodden on the surface, but they have this great hidden strength underneath. And I really enjoyed that way that you explored the moral questions and the ambiguity in the book. What are some of the big questions that you hope that readers or maybe book clubs might take away from this book and discuss?
Look, I think that, as far as what characters are concerned, or just the story in general?
Either, yeah. Characters mostly, I guess.
Characters are concerned, I hope people read them and can see, they are flawed, and they can see that they're real. I mean, look, I think one of the great things why people get so much out of reading is the fact that, look, we all operate on what's consumable in society. So the things that we hold back, that whatever prevents us from saying those things, are still there. We're all flawed. Everyone listening to this will know. I couldn't disclose what was in my head on a daily basis. They'd fucking lock me up. I don't think that's too untrue for most people. So when people read material, there's parts of a character that they might identify with. And so things that they might not talk about or disclose with anyone, but there's a level of comfort in that, because if someone has written it, then that gives a reader a level of solidarity and galvanizes them with something that they go, I'm not alone. If someone wrote this, then they must be feeling similar things. Or they see.
I think that's a really good point.
So, for me, that's true of me. When I read or I watch something, I remember, I've struggled with issues with mental health over the years and have been in some dark spots, but I could watch Seinfeld, right? And that could pull me out of a bit of a hole, because as pathetic as George Costanza was, someone had to recognize those flaws and foibles who have written it.
Yeah.
So I was like, I can't be that bad. I'm not that guy. So there was some comedy in that, but that's, I think that there's, so for people to read these characters, to realize, to see slithers of some sort of authenticity of maybe themselves or people that they know. And I think that's why people get drawn to characters or to books. And then also to, people within that, people might not enjoy that on the same breath as well, because if they see themselves in that, or they see something that reminds them of the past, or there's some sort of environment or something that's going on situationally that reminds them of their past, then it might not be a good experience. But I would say, if they finish the book, I remember being at a writers' festival and someone said to me, I didn't really enjoy your book. And I was like, oh, well, it's okay. I said, did you finish it? And they said, yes. I said, well, you didn't dislike it that much because you finished it. I would argue, would make a suggestion that perhaps you're saying you didn't like it because of the way it made you feel. And they said, yes. And I said, that's as good as a 5-star review for me. I'm done. What you're hoping for is to have an effect. Good or bad.
I think it doesn't matter if people love it or hate it, but if they're passionate about it,
either way,
it's the ones who don't care about it. That's what you don't want.
About it, and that's terrible. But so what my hope is that for people read it and to have some sort of effect on them, so that they're thinking of it a little bit longer than just putting it down and going, oh, well, that's that. So if they think about it and the characters, or they're looking forward to going back and reading it, and I think the great appeal or the great lure for people to experience that is to write things that are common, that might, create flawed characters so that people understand that, or like I said, derive some sort of comfort that they're not alone, that this is, these are real people. Like I said, we're all flawed. We all operate in a very, very shallow way most of the time, because we're only disclosing what we as a society, believe or
well, the book is full of secrets and lies and
Yep.
and then about the courage that it takes to uncover the truth. Do you think that that's sort of at the heart of any good story, that balance?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's when things are sinister and there's something that's got to be, gained, something good that's got to be gained from uncovering something, but you're putting yourself in danger by doing it, then that's compelling, because a lot of us never get a situation where that's going to happen. That's why crime is such a big genre. I mean, most people don't live in crime. Most people don't ever get into a situation where they're involved with the police or a murder or something's going on. It just doesn't happen. So there's this suspended disbelief of going into a novel or indeed a movie where that's happening, where people become fascinated by it. So I think that, while those things are going on, where there's something to be gained by bringing something to light and having a good outcome, that's juxtaposed with the danger that it takes to exact that. So I think that's the basis of good crime, anything. So those two things are going on at the same time, married with the fact that most people never find themselves in that situation.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, look, I mean, I could, no one, if I wrote a book about my life, I mean, who gives a shit? You know what I mean? Like, no one cares. Like, put some crime in there and something's going on, he could get in trouble, or that's happened, and people are like, wow, what's going to happen? So we don't live, most people don't live that way. So it's, it's compelling, and that's why.
It is compelling. It's very compelling in this book. I think we're going to go to audience questions in a moment. Before we do that, I wanted to say how much I love the ending in the book. Without giving anything away, it does tie up the loose ends like any good crime book does, but it has this wonderfully open question that leaves readers wondering what is going to happen next, which I really enjoyed. What do you think is more important in a novel, the first page or the last page?
That's a good question, one I've never been asked. I think probably the first page to get your hooks in. You know what I mean? I think that's because you can still have an ambiguous end and still someone have enjoyed the book. It's hard to have a really shit start and people go along for the journey.
People never get to the end. If you've got a shit start, they never get to the end.
Just on my toes, that's probably what I would say, Cass. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, I've got more questions, but Jana, happy to let the audience have a turn.
Yeah, so we've got a few coming in. We'll start off with Trish. She wants to know how you approach writing your female characters differently.
It's a very good question, Trish. Look, for me, that comes from from observing as closely as I can over the years, women. You know what I mean? It's so different to a man in so many different ways, other than the physical side of things. And I've been lucky enough, I think, to have some really, really strong female influences in my life, and females that I can still talk to about an array of things. So when you're doing that, when you're talking about things that are quite intimate, then one, you learn about yourself, but also you understand, it becomes very, very obvious what's different about a woman's perspective and where they come from. And so for me, it's having those. I think what's helped me write female characters has been those touchstones that I still have very, very close relationships with females. So look, it's always tricky because I'm not a female, you know what I mean? So it's always interesting to see when the first read of a book before it gets published, how female characters are taken by the female readers who get to read it first. So I'm always very aware of it, though, that there's a distinct difference between both of them.
Great. We've also got a question from Ruben, and he's wondering, given the lockdowns and travel bans, if you were able to revisit Darwin at all recently in writing the book and to do some footstepping, and if you did, how would you compare it to how it was in the 90s?
No, Ruben, I didn't. That was a real bummer. It was so disappointing. I had 2 weeks I had planned to go up there with my wife, and we were just going to drive around and get right into it. So it was disappointing. I'd started writing it well before, and that was, and then had planned to go up and photograph a whole heap of things. So I planned to go back. We had a book tour planned on this, and then this has happened again. So I will go back to Darwin at some point. But I referenced the changes in Darwin, talking to a couple of people who live there who I knew. One guy who I grew up with as an army. We were on barracks together, and he's living up in Darwin. So I spoke to him quite a bit about he's been living in Darwin for a long time. So we spoke quite often about what Darwin was like contemporarily. But the fascinating part of this was researching what it was like back then, and what I remembered of it in the 90s, which is, that's a long time ago now. But it was unfortunately I never got to go back up there, which was a real disappointment, to be honest.
This does kind of follow into Greg's question, and he says that you've clearly experienced a lot of the book's environment firsthand, but was there another aspect you felt you had to dig into the research to really know how to portray it?
Yeah, look, I needed to really dig into what was going on there politically, and historically where government was lying there at that point, and then also what was happening as far as that policy, that is white Australian policy, was, how that was unfolding and where it was in historically at that time. I had my father, his mother, when my father left home, she was, there was a young Indigenous boy that came into their household. And so I spoke to my father about that and what that was like and where that boy had come from and what his outcome has been. So that's where a lot of the research was sort of filtered, and that was really important to get it right. As far as landscape was concerned, when I was living there, I certainly got out into the bush and did a heap of fishing and saw a lot of crocodiles, and so that was very, very vivid and still real, and that doesn't change. The landscape is the
mosquitoes.
Mosquitoes, flies, like it was. So the fishing on the beach, I used to fish down at Lee Point there, and on the tide, the big tides, the tides would come in, that as you're fishing, you would 10 minutes later you're sort of shin deep and pulling in whiting, catch a dozen whiting in 25 minutes. So I did experience all those things. So they were still really vivid and such wonderful memories. But a lot of the research was filtered down that road.
Christine would like to know about your writing routine. Do you have a specific routine? And specifically, she wants to know, when you do your plotting, do you kind of plan your entire plot before you start, or do you write kind of episodes and piece them together?
As far as routine is concerned, so if I'm writing a novel, then and I'm into it, and so it usually happens where I've got a block of time where I'm not on the job acting, and I can away I go, or I'll say no to something and say no, I need to do this, and then I'm really disciplined. So I'll write between 1,500 and 2,000 and 2,500 words a day. And so that's achievable in, I might spend 6 hours doing that with breaks, and but I'll do that so that in a week then I'll hit a certain amount of words. If I can get to 10,000 words in a week. And look, 50% of those words may never stay, but it just, you're cracking on with it and you're getting on with it. It's not hard for me to write that amount of words in a day. I truly love sitting down writing a novel. If I could do that, nothing else, and that's what I do. As far as plotting is concerned, the plotting really happens while you're writing. For me, it's the downtime. It's never happening while I'm writing. The plotting happens for me. Okay, I finished the day's work. What's going to happen next? Or I won't sit down and write out a plan of where the novel's going to go. I'll start it with a really, really good idea of what the story will be and what the elements are. And then it evolves as you write. For me, that works for most. For some people, they'll write out a whole, a whole plan on how it's going to happen. But for me, that's how it evolves, which is really different from a screenplay, which is a 3-act structure, and that's much more a plot-driven type of situation. A novel is so, you can go off in a million different ways, because there's no real, you don't have a page count. It's just go. So, I like to do that sometimes, and I can always peel it back, as opposed to a screenplay. It's like, I've got to get to the first act turning point by about page 15 or 17 or 18. And I've got to get to a second act turning point with 15 pages left to go. You were bound by structure. And so you write within those things. I'll know a first act turning point, a second act turning point, and then fill it in between there. A novel's really different. There's a lot more leeway with a novel, particularly a first draft. It's like, whatever, just wait.
Just get it out. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so when you do have a story idea, then how do you decide if it's going to be for the page or for the screen?
Look, I'll know straight away, because I won't write anything. Like if I've got an idea for a screenplay, then it'll be a screenplay. And if I've got an idea for a novel, then it'll be a novel. And then, whatever happens after that, obviously with published work, that can be turned into something on screen. But I've always had really definitive ideas on what they both are. So I'll know what one is and what the other is.
We have one final question from Cassie. And because a lot of people haven't read the book yet, we don't really know how it ends. Does it still lend itself to a follow-up or a sequel, or are you planning on one?
No, I don't think so. I think that I'm going to go back, and I guess there's a character there that within the crime genre, the policeman. But no, I don't see that happening on this one. I think that it's done, and I sort of look forward to the next novel that I write. Creating new people, or a new protagonist at least. So that's probably where it'll head. Great. Unless they pay me a whole heap of money to do it. No.
Well, we were going to finish by asking Matt to read something from the novel, because, of course, being an actor, he would do a fabulous job. But unfortunately, he doesn't have any books with him. And rather disappointingly, he can't remember the lines from, the entire book. I thought you just had the whole book in your head, Matt. But anyway, we'll have to leave that for another time. But look, thank you so much for sharing all of that insight with us tonight. For everybody watching, Still is a real page turner. It's a very tense, atmospheric novel. But as we've talked about, it really does examine a lot of questions about ethical questions and moral questions that I think will leave you thinking a lot afterwards. Please buy a copy from Avid, or if you're in Sydney, buy it from your local bookstore in Sydney, because they're struggling at the moment. Same with Melbourne. Just buy it from any bookstore. Thank you so much, Matt, for joining us. I'm not sure if Jana's got some final thoughts there, but thank you very much.
Look, it's a pleasure, and thanks for all coming aboard and listening. The sound of my voice makes me tired, so I hope no one fell asleep in that. But thank you very much. Look, it was lovely to join you guys, and thanks for tuning in.
Once you're asleep, have got their cameras off, so you can't tell.
Would know. And thanks, Jana, as well. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much, Cass. And thanks to everyone in the audience. Thank you for being flexible during these lockdowns and changes as we move to Zoom or have to, pivot. So we just thank you for your flexibility and for joining us. All right. Thanks so much, Matt, and congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations, Matt.
Thanks, Cass. See you guys. Bye.
Thank you.